There is a story most people never think about, and it sits right in the middle of the most read book in human history. A man goes on a long journey. Before he leaves, he calls his servants and divides his wealth among them. To one he gives 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. Then he disappears. The servants with 5 and 2 talents go out immediately, put the money to work, and double what they were given. But the servant with 1 talent does something different. He finds a patch of soft earth, digs a hole, and buries it. Safe, untouched, exactly as it was given. When the master returns, he praises the ones who multiplied what they had. But to the one who buried his talent, he says something brutal. He calls him wicked, he calls him lazy, and he takes the talent away. Most people who grew up in church heard this story and walked away thinking it was about spiritual gifts, about singing in the choir or preaching or volunteering on Sunday mornings. And maybe it is, partly, but there is a layer to this story that almost nobody talks about because it makes people uncomfortable, because it implies something radical about how God actually views your relationship with money, with opportunity, with the mind He placed inside your skull. The servant did not lose the talent. He did not gamble it away. He did not spend it on reckless living. He simply did nothing. He was afraid of risk. He was afraid of failure. He was afraid of the master. And that fear, that paralysis disguised as caution, was enough to be called wicked. Not misguided, not unfortunate, wicked. Let that land for a moment. The human brain is the most complex object in the known universe. 14 billion neurons firing in patterns so intricate that neuroscience, for all its advances, still cannot fully explain how you form a single memory, how you dream, how you recognize a face you haven't seen in 20 years. This organ, this 3-pound miracle sitting behind your eyes, can learn languages, solve equations, compose music, build cities, and imagine futures that do not yet exist. And it was placed inside you not by evolution alone, not by chance, but according to a belief held by billions across centuries, that a creator of infinite intelligence chose deliberately to form you in His image, to give you the capacity to reason, to plan, to build, to create. The very faculties that separate human beings from every other creature on earth are, in theological terms, a divine endowment, a gift, a responsibility. So here is the question that nobody in your church, your family, or your circle of friends is asking out loud. If God gave you a mind capable of solving problems, generating value, and building lasting wealth, why are you treating it like that servant treated his talent? Why are you burying it? The answer is complicated, but one thread runs through almost every person who has the capacity to do more and consistently does less. And that thread is a deeply embedded, rarely examined belief that wealth and godliness exist in opposition, that to desire financial abundance is somehow spiritually suspicious, that the truly faithful ought to be content with little, should not concern themselves too much with earthly things, and should certainly not appear to be chasing money with any kind of seriousness. This belief is so old and so widespread that it feels like truth. But when you trace it back, when you actually follow it to its origins, you find that it is not a biblical conviction. It is a cultural infection, a misreading piled on top of a misreading, passed down through generations until it became indistinguishable from doctrine. Money is not the root of all evil. That is not what the text says. The love of money, the obsession, the idolatry, the willingness to harm and deceive and sacrifice everything for it. That is the root Paul was writing about. The distinction is not subtle. A surgeon can love medicine without loving the scalpel. The scalpel is a tool. And money, when it is understood correctly, is exactly that, a tool, one of the most powerful tools ever invented by human civilization. a mechanism for storing value, exchanging goods, funding dreams, building institutions, and changing lives at scale. The question was never whether you should have it. The question was always what you would do with it once you did. Abraham was extraordinarily wealthy. Solomon was the richest man of his era, and the text does not present his wealth as a spiritual failure. It presents it as a blessing given in response to wisdom. Joseph, who started as a slave in a foreign country, rose to become the second most powerful man in Egypt through a combination of character, intelligence, strategic thinking, and the ability to plan 7 years ahead. Lydia in the New Testament was a dealer in purple cloth, a luxury good, and she was described as a worshiper of God. Zacchaeus was a wealthy tax collector, and when he encountered Jesus, the response was not to give everything away and live in poverty. The response was to give half and restore fourfold any he had wronged. These were people of means, and they were people of faith. The intersection was not accidental. But here is where it gets personal, because the theological history only takes you so far. At some point, the conversation has to move from what the text says to what you are actually doing with your one irreplaceable life. And that conversation tends to get uncomfortable very quickly. Most people who feel stuck financially are not stuck because of lack of resources. They are stuck because of lack of a plan. And they have no plan because they have never sat down with real seriousness to think about what they want to build and why. They spend years reacting to circumstances, moving from paycheck to paycheck, from crisis to opportunity, without any coherent vision of where they are going. They pray for financial breakthrough the same way they pray for good weather, as a hope that something external will shift so that their internal situation improves. But God does not typically send ravens to deliver cash to your door. He gave you a mind. He expects you to use it. The miracle, more often than not, is not the parting of the sea. It is the wisdom to know which sea needs parting and the courage to start walking. There is a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to physically rewire itself in response to new experiences, new habits, new patterns of thought. For decades, scientists believed the brain was largely fixed after childhood. We now know this is wrong. The adult brain continues to change, to adapt, to build new pathways right up until death. What you think about consistently shapes the architecture of your mind. What you practice becomes more natural. What you believe about yourself and your possibilities affects the options your brain even bothers to present to you as viable. This is not metaphor. This is measurable, documented, peer-reviewed biology, and it maps almost perfectly onto what spiritual traditions have said for thousands of years about the power of thought, the renewal of the mind, and the connection between inner reality and outer circumstance. If you have spent years telling yourself that money is not for people like you, that your background, your education, your circumstances have placed you outside the circle of those who build wealth, then your brain has not been lazy. It has been incredibly diligent. It has been actively building neural pathways that confirm exactly that belief. It has been filtering out opportunity. It has been dismissing ideas before they fully form. It has been constructing a version of reality in which your limitations feel like facts, because you have rehearsed them so many thousands of times that they have become the default architecture of how you see the world. This is not a character flaw. It is biology, but it is also reversible, and that reversal requires the same kind of disciplined, intentional effort that any meaningful change requires. It will not happen through passive hope. It will not happen through occasional motivation. It will happen through sustained, deliberate reprogramming of your thoughts, your habits, your associations, your daily inputs, and your fundamental story about what is possible for you. The people who have built meaningful wealth, Not just the inheritance class, but the ones who started from nothing and constructed something real, share a handful of traits that show up across culture, across geography, across century. They have a clearly defined vision of where they're going. They are not embarrassed by ambition. They treat time as a finite, precious resource, and they guard it accordingly. They invest constantly in their own knowledge and skill, understanding that the mind is the primary asset and that it must be maintained and upgraded like any other tool. They take calculated risks rather than avoiding all risk, understanding that the servant who buried his talent was not being prudent, he was being faithless. And almost universally, they have found a way to serve other people at scale, because wealth, in its most legitimate form, is simply a measure of the value you have added to the world. This is not a prosperity gospel. Prosperity gospel takes a truth and corrupts it. It says that faith is a transaction, that you give to the church and God gives money back like a spiritual slot machine. That is not what this is. This is something quieter and harder and more demanding. It is the recognition that you were made to contribute, that the mind you carry is not a passive receiver of life's circumstances, but an active participant in shaping them. That faith without works, without the hard, specific, often unglamorous work of building something real, remains exactly as useful as a buried talent, which is to say, completely useless. You were not made to merely survive. You were not designed to move through 7 decades of existence, hoping nothing too bad happens, staying small because smallness feels safe, asking God to bless a plan you never made, waiting for a miracle you are not prepared to receive. The ancient wisdom is clear on this. The biological evidence confirms it. The stories of every person who has ever built something from nothing agree on it. You have a mind of staggering power and almost untapped potential. The question is not whether God wants you to use it. The question is whether you will stop being afraid of what happens if you do. Dig up the talent. It was never supposed to be in the ground.